The sound of Nottinghamshire.
Together, we can make a difference. BBCRadio Nottingham.
So you ready for today's Make a Difference guest? And we're refocusing on Ukraine this afternoon. It's not been easy watching the news about the devastation going on in Ukraine and how it's affecting millions of families. Well, my next guest, Charlie Hastings, felt she couldn't stand by and do nothing. So not only has she been volunteering to help refugees arriving on the Polish-Ukrainian border, Charlie has also co-founded a Nottingham charity called Supply Ukraine, and Charlie is here now. Charlie, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you for being here. So tell me a little bit about Supply Ukraine then. What's the aim of it?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much for having us on your show. Essentially, Supply Ukraine is dedicated to supporting and fundraising for local grassroots organisations in and around Ukraine that are working on the front lines to alleviate the humanitarian crisis.
Okay, I see. And did you decide to set this up after what you had seen yourself, what you'd seen with your own eyes?
Yeah, absolutely. Our initial intention was to go over to Poland and see if we could help out, at one of the refugee centres, which we actually did at the Warsaw train station for a little while. And while there definitely was work to be done there for, any volunteers that were willing to come out, what we really found was there were a lot of small organisations that really needed funding and support that were sort of managing to do a huge amount with a very tiny budget. So we thought that we would try and highlight some of those people's work and see if we could get them some help from over here.
Okay. We'll just get on to that latter part in a moment. But tell me just about what the experience was like for you on the Polish-Ukrainian border. What kind of stories were you seeing? What kind of people were you helping? What was it like?
So obviously, there were a lot of quite distressing things, a lot of people very traumatised and some people with injuries. But there was also a lot of inspirational things happening there as well. So there were really a lot of dedicated people coming to help out. And by the time we got there, the flow of refugees had slowed a little bit, and we were just blown away by how well organised the people over there were, especially since certainly in the parts that we were in, there didn't seem to be many NGOs or, government involvement. It seemed to be a lot of small local groups. So, yeah, we really found it to be a very inspiring experience.
And I guess then that experience with the small local groups is what then informed your next step. So when you talk about small local groups, then what are you talking about in particular here?
I mean, we met, for example, people like Arta, who was our guide who showed us around in Medica and Przemysl. And Arta was just a private individual who kind of pivoted his entire business once the war started, or a large portion of his business, to basically sorting donations, sending buses into Ukraine, bringing people out. And as the sort of flow of refugees slowed down a little, he turned to sending trucks and lorries filled with supplies into Ukraine. And he's managing to do all this just with a whip round, which is a sort of a Polish GoFundMe. So just small donations from the local community, really. And now he's sending, trucks and lorries in almost every day. But obviously it costs a huge amount to do that. It's around €350 to send a small truck there and back. And just to put that in context, that's about a third of the average wage in Poland at the minute. So, that's why we launched supplyukraine.org. And we try to highlight the work of people like Arta on that platform.
Yeah. So is your aim to raise money in order to send to people like Arta, or is your aim to collect aid?
So we're definitely, we're kind of doing both. We're definitely working on the fundraising. That's sort of the next stage of what we're trying to do. So again, supplyukraine.org, you can follow all of our fundraising efforts. So we're all from the poker industry, my friends and I, so we're hoping to do some charity tournaments and some other fundraising events. But the other thing we've been involved in is logistics. So, for example, we had a donation given to one of our founders, Paul, from the Bristol Royal Infirmary, and that was blood kits and wound packs and things like that. And so Paul organised the transport of those goods. He actually jumped in his car and drove around 3,000 miles there and back to deliver those to one of our contacts near the border to make sure they get where they need to go. So that's another thing that we would encourage anybody that has things that they'd like to donate and they're not sure how, or other ways they'd like to help, they can get in touch with us again at supplyukraine.org.
Okay.
We can hopefully help them out.
So, did you say you're a poker background, as in the card game poker?
Yeah, that's right. So basically, we work in the poker events industry. So our job is to sort of travel to different countries and help set up large tournaments in different places. So we've travelled a lot in the past, and so yeah, that's basically where we're all from.
Wow. Well, I mean, that is completely different. I mean, I suppose not the travel aspect, but that is different from Ukraine. What moved you to get involved then?
I mean, essentially, obviously our industry shut down during COVID, and it was still kind of just about recovering when the war started. So we were all just kind of sat at home just watching it unfold on the television, and obviously, just watching with horror what was happening. And it just got to the point where we felt like we couldn't really sort of just sit there and do nothing anymore. And whilst it is very different from our regular job, essentially sort of logistics and event management was a big part of what I did. So it wasn't too much of a shock to the system to pivot to that sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess you had the tools. It was just kind of refocusing on something that was a little bit different. It's funny, isn't it, with Ukraine? Right at the beginning of all of this, and there was lots of focus, wasn't there, to collecting aid and to lorries that were going out there, and that does seem to have dwindled a little bit. But from what I'm hearing, from what you're saying, Charlie, is that the need is still there.
Yes, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. At first, they were almost overwhelmed with donations. People like Arta were mostly spending their time trying to organise what had been sent out there, make sure it didn't go to waste, and get it to exactly where it was needed. But now they're finding that there's a need for things like purchasing pallets of food and fresh water, because obviously as the world kind of moves on a little bit, the flow has definitely slowed down. So I think it's very important that we try and do some fundraising for them at this stage when perhaps attention shifted maybe a little bit.
Yeah. Look, Charlie, really great to have you on. Thank you for explaining a little bit more about what you're doing. Charlie Hastings there, who is from Supply Ukraine. That website, again, I know Charlie mentioned it a couple of times, but it's supplyukraine.org if you want to see a little bit more about what they're doing and find out a little bit more about the organisation itself.